I talk a lot about the overdependence that I see in so many musicians on the technicalities of the music. You know, the chords, the scales, the intervals, what I sometimes call the math. And while that stuff can be beneficial, I question how necessary it is for you to play beautiful, authentic music in your instrument, and sometimes how it gets in the way of that. So I got Richie Beirach on camera to talk about two musicians that we all know and love, whom he played with for many years, and how neither one of them really knew any theory. They barely read music at all, and how they still became icons of jazz. Now, before you dismiss this by saying, well, I'm not a musical genius, consider elements of this that could apply to you, and the fundamental idea of the role of all the technical components of music that you may be spending a lot of time thinking about, thinking that it applies to your music. Take a listen to this.
Mike Lake asked me an interesting question. He said, you know, I have an idea for a Zoom video about your times with Stan Getz and Chet Baker. And in a minute, I realized that it was actually an excellent idea because they were both very similar. And they were my mentors, two of, and my bosses when I worked for them in the 70s. First with Stan from 1972 until 74, and then Chet from around 75 till around 79, on and off, nothing steady. And these guys are remarkably similar in the sense that they're both geniuses, natural players, incredible ears. Both of them didn't read music. Stan a little bit when he played with Woody Herman. Both knew nothing about theory or harmony. Both played their instruments so superbly in terms of technique and tone, intonation. Both had great sense of time, could swing, natural time, flowing, great phrases, great spontaneous players. Both of them couldn't write music at all. They never wrote anything of substance. They were both very complicated men, both drug addicts, alcoholics at different times in their lives. And both taught me so much about real jazz playing, what it means to play every night, 2 sets a night, 6 months a year, on the road, in the town that you live, playing original compositions from me, many standards, the same tunes every night. The game was the same tunes at night, every night, but fresh, improvised, taking chances with surprises, but never going below a certain level of excellence and professionalism. Stan was a gigantic jazz star because you have to remember he had the best-selling jazz record at that time with the Girl from Ipanema, the Getz, the bossa nova stuff. This was a worldwide hit, #1. It was not a jazz hit. It was like Sinatra, Rolling Stones, that kind of shit. And he had a gigantic name. And every time and this was in 1972, he still had an enormous name. And to his credit, we didn't play bossa nova music. We played our own music. We played standards. You know, he played that for a while, but he had enough integrity and also enough presence of mind to go ahead and use his name he got from the bossa nova stuff to become a major jazz star. He was a very strong leader. He had an innate sense of programming, how to put together a set, to begin with a certain kind of a tune, to talk to the people at a certain point, to not repeat different textures in a row. In other words, no 2 ballads in a row, no 2 up-tempos. Contrast. He taught me contrast. how he put the set together. Also, he had a very good understanding of the balance between tension and relaxation. And when he was on the bandstand, he was very democratic. He was not at all pushy or authoritative. He let the music happen. And he loved to hear his sidemen sounding great. He loved it. I was very young and inexperienced, but talented, of course. And I was with Jack DeJohnette and Dave Holland, and they had just finished playing for 4 years with Chick Corea at the top of the level of jazz gigs. So for me, it was a fantastic learning experience. Everybody else was much more developed, experienced. And I got a chance to play with Jack DeJohnette every night. And this was my education, my jazz education. You know, I went to Manhattan School of Music and graduated in 1972 with a degree in theory and composition, but this was like my master's degree. And then going with Chet was like my doctorate. That's another thing, we'll get to that. But Stan was also very encouraging. He said, Richie, write some stuff. He could somehow play anything that we wrote. He could read the melody, of course, and he didn't understand the names of the chords, what they were, but he heard them. And this is not just 2-5-1 stuff. They were complicated chords that I wrote and Dave Holland wrote. He breezed right through them, played great solos with excellent motives, with great development, had a natural sense of dynamics, and was iconic. The other side of him, he was, as Zoot Sim said, he was a nice bunch of guys. He was extremely complicated. He had split personality. He could be like your uncle, very kind, very supportive, and then turn around and be very difficult, very much an asshole, very mean, hurtful, finding your vulnerable points. He did that very often. He had his own problems, okay. He was very crazy about money. Even though he had lots of money and had made money, he didn't like to pay very much. He just wanted to hold on to it. And he made you fight to get what you deserve. And I learned a lot about the ugly side of getting paid in a jazz situation, okay? But in balance, and just to hear him play, his sound, the tone, people say Michael Brecker was a saxophone, and he was. If you think in terms of Michael, Stan Getz was kind of like the Michael Brecker of his day, just like the complete command of the horn from top to bottom, and a beautiful singing sound, and most importantly, it was Stan. In those days, those generation of guys, Stan, Chet, Miles, Train, Bill Evans, they had their own sound, identifiable sound instantly. 2 or 3 notes and you knew who it was. That's because there was no real jazz education then. The educational situation was you learned on the gig, you learned in the street, you learned on the bandstand. So people didn't have the advantage or disadvantage of a university jazz education. Now, the fact that many people have jazz educations, it's wonderful and it's terrible. It's wonderful because there's so many more millions of people that have been taught how to play jazz in a certain way with the scales and the chords and the approach and the different genres. But when you teach anything in a mass way, you have uniformity. And when you have uniformity, that's the opposite of what you want in jazz. Jazz is the music of the individual expression. Classical music is about the composer, right? And the individual sound and the individual style is what jazz is really about. And I must admit, we have thousands and thousands of really good saxophone, trumpet players, piano players now, much more than before. But do we have so many more individual players identifiable? No. So it's a question. It's just the way it is. It's not like, well, it's terrible and we should go back to it. You can't do that. But Stan's generation, Chet Baker, these guys learned on the bandstand. And of course, they practiced at home and they read books. But there wasn't the uniformity of a 4-year jazz program in Manhattan School of Music or Berkeley School of Music and a master's and a doctorate. That didn't exist. Now, I went to school 1968, the Manhattan School of Music. There was no jazz department. You didn't talk about jazz. It was a dirty word. It was a 4-letter word in the classical school. But I learned from my friends, from Liebman and Randy, and we talked about it, and I had the books from the contemporary composers and the harmony, and we put it together ourselves, kind of in a combination of a street way with the emphasis on practicality and application, not in the strict academic way. Well, when I got with Stan, to hear him play every night, so intuitive and so just beautiful and swinging with that deep sound that stayed in my ear. I remember Clifford, we played My Foolish Heart, just incredible ballads, just a great experience. Much like, forget it. But he was difficult and he was crazy and moody and hurtful sometimes. But on balance, I learned so much from him. With Chet was much kinder, basically a nicer person, also very complicated, destroyed a certain part of him, a lifelong junkie, a self-confessed addict, and just couldn't face the daily life, the pressures and the exigencies of life, and could just do one thing, play his horn. Chet could read no music, nothing, and didn't understand harmony and didn't want to, didn't need to. His ear was the most developed I've ever seen from a non-jazz perspective. In other words, it's one thing to have an ear for simple chords, you know. 2-5-1s moving through the key. He could hear chords, progressions that were not 2-5-1s, that were contemporary sounds, Wayne Shorter tunes like Pinocchio or Improvise, or my tunes like Broken Wing and Zal and Leaving. These tunes are not simple tunes. They're written with a very free, open harmonic concept. There might be 2-5s in them, but they're just freely created. Chet breezed right through it. The other thing is his sound. Chet was a trumpet player, and you know the trumpet can be a very macho instrument, like a matador. Dum, da-da-dum, right? And you think about Freddie Hubbard, Dizzy, Woody Shaw. These are guys, very macho and powerful trumpet players. Chet played the shit out of the trumpet and could burn and had range and could play fast, great bebop lines. But he had the ability to transform the trumpet into an intimate, personal instrument where if you listen to it on the bandstand or in the audience, it sounded like he was playing right to your ear. It was soft, but it was very concentrated. It was like a laser. And it went very deep, penetrated into your unconscious, right through your ear. And many times we played concerts, we played clubs, and the New Morning in Paris, we played the Vanguard, we played the Jazz Gallery in Washington. And when we started playing, it was not noisy, but people were moving around. He played 2 or 3 notes and he could quiet the room in a second with soft, intense, beautiful notes from the trumpet. He played mostly sitting down, which is completely unusual. Trumpet players need to stand up to project the wind he could get tremendous amount of energy and sound sitting. Partly because he felt more comfortable, he liked being part of the band, and partly because he was high and he couldn't stand up so long. That's the truth, okay? We're not going to sugarcoat Chet's addiction. But Chet at base was a kind guy. He was a cowboy. He was from Oklahoma, okay? And he was not comfortable with people, really. He was quiet. He was modest. He was very deep and intense. He was intelligent. He was not educated, but he was naturally, intuitively smart. And he knew people. His sound stayed in my ear, and it really gave me a model for my own sound on the piano. You know, the piano is a very tough instrument to get a personal sound on because we're so removed from the sound. With a trumpet, you have your lip on the mouthpiece. That's it, and then the sound. With a violin, you got your finger on the string and the bow. The guitar, you've got your finger right on the string. The piano, you hit a key, the key hits a hammer, and somewhere in Berlin, the hammer hits the string. So you're very far removed from the sound. Difficult to get an identifiable sound, but of course it's possible. 3 notes from Bill Evans, it's Bill. Chick, Keith, Herbie, Paul Bley, Art Tatum. We know who they are by the sound. Hopefully, I've learned that myself, right? I think I have. Chet embodied that feeling of sadness, reflection, not insecurity, intensity, love, beauty, modesty, and there was a heroic nature in his playing because he was such a destroyed father, that he would get up there every night and play his heart out. And he related to people. He sat there and played ballads, and the people were just crying and smiling and feeling it. Me too. He was also crazy in certain ways. He was old school. He was bebop generation. He would do some very harsh, tough things to me on stage when he felt I was not coming up to his idea of what it should be. I already talked on a video with Mike about Chet's embarrassing me about my volume. He felt I was playing too loud. I didn't think I was playing too loud for him, but it was too loud for his developed sense of dynamics, which were way beyond mine. And he was right in the end. And it turns out the reason he embarrassed me is to get my attention. And it worked because even now, when I go to comp for someone, whether it's a singer or a horn player or Dave, it flashes like, are you too loud? Should you be softer? Just that, it's like a muscle memory. It stayed with me. I'm not saying I approve of it or I would ever do it to any of my friends or students. No, I think humiliation has no place. But it was not really humiliation. It felt that way in the moment. It was teaching. These older guys would yell at you on the bandstand to get your attention, okay? But Chet and Stan had this magic about them. There's no question about it. And when you're traveling with a guy, you're traveling, 4 or 5 months a year on the road, 6 nights a week, you really get to know them. You see them tired, you see them happy, you see them drunk, you see them sad, you see them sick. You see what kind of a person it is. And that's why I love the road, because everything comes out. And jazz is different every night because we don't know what we're going to play. I mean, of course, it's a language, but you change the language every night to try and surprise yourself and surprise your bandmates and, of course, the audience. I learned so much from Chet and Stan that someday I'm going to write a book about it and go deeper into each subject. For example, Chet and Stan had amazing ways of playing up tempos. Up tempos are difficult. It's difficult technically, and it's difficult to have musical content because it's so fast. They had amazing ways of navigating the up tempos. It was phenomenal how we go from playing a really slow ballad, like My Foolish Heart or Blue and Green with Chet, to playing a real up tempo, and no fake and no halftime. Chet was calm. It's like, you know, in the middle of a hurricane, you have the eye of the hurricane. It's calm. It's blue sky. There's no wind. Everything outside of it is chaos, hurricane. Chet was in the middle of the bandstand. He would sit right near the piano, the bass, and the drums, and we were burning. And he was calm inside the storm. It was amazing. Stan, too. With Jack DeJohnette, one of the greatest drummers in the world, and especially up-tempo player, with Dave Holland, we played some really fast tempos. And I always learned from Stan, because the eighth notes changed, the triplet became more flattened out because of the tempo. And yet how to keep it from being stiff. This is a magic thing. That's how you learn to play jazz, night to night, every night. And now those kinds of days are over for the most part. And what they're learned in the school, they're learned at jam sessions, but I don't want to be a bitter old guy, but it's not the same. So I feel like I've been blessed with having both of them as my mentors and ex-bosses. And I just would like to say thank you to them if they're listening anywhere. Thank you.